Theo Mercer had written a dozen blockbuster screenplays, slick, ironclad structures in which heroes saved the planet 3 minutes before the bomb detonated. But he couldn't remember the last time any of them had saved him. In Los Angeles, he had an ocean view house in the Hollywood Hills, a Mercedes that smelled of new leather, and calls from producers who spoke only in weekend box office numerals. Yet every morning he woke feeling flat, like a television left on mute when his agent emailed the latest studio notes. Punchier first act, more quips, and could the love interest be 22 instead of 28? Theo snapped. He closed his laptop, scrolled through a home exchange website, and stared at a listing that seemed plucked from a postcard. Whitewashed cottage, honey farm, Naxos, Greece. Prefer city apartment or quiet place with fast Wi-Fi. Flexible dates. The listing's photographs promised violet dawns over stone terraces, a flight of bees blurred like amber confetti, and a handwritten sign. Cal Caldation XOL, can auction hung crooked on a blue door. Anonymity, salt wind, nobody. Quoting opening weekend projections. He exhaled, typed a hasty reply, and by the time the agent called back, Theo was already picturing a one-way ticket across 9 time zones. Zoe Papaditiona Postecripier of 22 hives perched on a hillside above the Aegean hit accept almost before she finished reading Theo's offer. She had inherited the cottage, the bees, and the Papadaki apiary sign from her grandfather, a man who believed the island could provide all the sweetness a life required. Zoe believed him most days. On the others, she fell asleep paging through contraband copies of Variety and glossy studio biographies tourists left behind, wondering what it might feel like to drift down a boulevard where no one knew she once got stung on the lip and looked, for 3 days, like a tragic trumpet fish. The chance to swap her 2-room cottage for a villa in the hills, well, that felt like a gust of Sirocco. Warm, improbable, and impossible to ignore. She bought her first pair of high-heeled sandals, arranged for her cousin Yorgos to check the hives twice a week, and practiced saying hello without the Greek H rolling in her throat like gravel. Theo landed on Naxos, 6 hours past sunset. He followed emailed directions. A left at the Stone Olive Press, a right at the goat tied to a fig tree, until the headlights of his rental Fiat skimmed over Zoe's cottage. Moonlight made the walls look powdered with sugar. The key waited beneath a chipped saucer on the sill, exactly as the listing promised. Inside, the sea air smelled of thyme and smoke. He found a jar of honey on the kitchen table, sealed with a square of fabric and twine, and a note in swirling penmanship. First taste is for courage. Z. The honey glowed as if it remembered sunsets. He dipped a spoon, let the syrup pool on his tongue, and felt, though he would not have put it this way yet, the first line of dialogue he'd cared about in months hummed to life in his chest. Beyond the shutters, the low thrumming of hives drifted through the dark, like distant applause. He fell asleep to that sound, boots still on, script notes forgotten in his luggage. At dawn, the bees announced themselves properly. Theo stumbled outside with coffee, expecting a pastoral hum, and met a full-tilt roar. Thousands of workers rising with the sun. Traffic on a 12-lane highway made of wings. He cursed, sloshed coffee, then noticed a laminated sheet nailed near the fence. Visitors, do not panic. Stand calm, think sweet thoughts. The absurdity coaxed the first genuine laugh out of him in weeks. He spent the morning exploring terraces carved by hand centuries before Hollywood had a single palm tree. Locals nodded, called him file, friend, and pressed fresh figs into his palms. He tried to write that afternoon, but the scene he opened, chasing drones through night vision tunnels, felt synthetic against the real hum beyond the window. At sunset, he carried his laptop onto the terrace, deleted 30 pages, and typed 3 new sentences. Imagine a man who no longer believes in heroes. Give him bees. He startled at his own certainty. then rode until the moon crowned the ridge. 8,000 miles west, Zoe emerged from LAX Customs, towing a suitcase breezy with taped-on fragile stickers. The air smelled of jet fuel and overchlorinated nostalgia. She climbed into an apple-ordered car and ascended winding roads lit by palatial houses. Theo's villa sat behind ironwork shaped like vines. The automatic gate parted for her as if bowing. Inside, everything gleamed: marble counters, floor-to-ceiling windows, a refrigerator humming with resignation. On the coffee table rested a stack of scripts bound in brass fasteners, each stamped confidential. Zoe traced the embossed letters of Theo's name, half expecting heat to radiate. Instead, she discovered another note printed on heavy cardstock. Welcome. Use what you like. The bees forgive me for leaving them. I hope the city forgives you for coming. No. Exhaustion pulled her down onto a designer sofa, too slick to encourage lounging. Yet soon curiosity prodded her upright. She opened a script, found a chase scene set in generic Eastern European backdrop street, and laughed so loudly it startled her. On Naxos, every stone step had a history. Here, even the alleys were placeholders. They began leaving each other breadcrumbs. Theo in Naxos found a second jar of honey labeled Blooms of March tucked inside the linen cabinet. Beneath it lay Zoe's childhood photo: knobby knees, smudged cheeks, bees alighting on her shoulders like epaulets. On the back, she'd written, "Every queen needs a guard." He pinned it above the desk. Zoe, in Los Angeles, discovered drafts of abandoned scripts in a closet, margins crowded with self-mocking notes. Dialogue sounds like dental floss and kill this cliche with fire. She giggled, scrawled her own comment in red pen, maybe he runs toward instead of away, and replaced the pages. Through spotty Wi-Fi and 11-hour time difference, they began emailing. It started practically, "Your stove clicks twice before lighting. Don't let Yorgis convince you to drink raki before noon." But the messages soon lengthened. Tio described bees shimmering like living coins. Zoe reported that the Pacific at sunset looked the color of burnt sugar just before it turns bitter. When Tio wrote that line into his new draft, he ended the sentence with "credit ZP." Days accrued like honeycomb cells. Tio's routine synchronized with the hives: wake, write until the sun threatened to crisp his laptop, inspect frames for mites, translate those miniature battles into character conflict. In the afternoons, he biked to the cafenio, where old men played backgammon and explained island gossip. "Zoe?" they'd say when he asked if she was doing well stateside. "Our Zoe has hurricane heart. She'll be fine." He vowed to fit that phrase into the screenplay. Nights he walked the beach road, tasting salt from the breakers, while shaping scenes that cracked open with the patient inevitability of an egg hatching. He felt, for the first time in a slate of feature deals, that he was writing something that might embarrass him with its honesty, and therefore matter. Meanwhile, Zoe tried on LA like a sequined jacket 2 sizes too large. She toured a studio backlot, eyes wide at plastic palm trees propped next to real ones. When a producer friend of Theo's invited her to a wrap party in Malibu, she went, carrying a jar of honey as hostess gift. Guests sipped cocktails that cost more than her ferry ticket, yet everyone fell silent after tasting the honey. Someone asked where they could order more. Someone else suggested bottled collaboration. Zoe laughed, deflecting, but her pulse drummed. Later that night, sitting on the villa's cantilevered balcony, she opened another of Theo's drafts and read a scene in which the hero, covered in stings, admits he deserves each one. She typed in the margin, "Pain can teach sweetness." She hesitated, then left her phone number. Theo called at dawn his time, stars dissolving into bougainvillea pink. Zoe answered while crossing Sunset Boulevard, traffic snarling like restless extras. Their first conversation wobbled, full of dropped syllables and awkward compliments. Yet when she described the Hollywood sky, so wide it makes you feel both infinite and unnecessary, Theo recognized the same taut emptiness that had driven him to Greece. He told her about a worker bee's lifespan, how she spent her final hours fanning a hive she would never taste again. Zoe went quiet, then said, "We owe them a better story, don't we?" He closed his eyes, heard the rush of wings outside, and replied, "Yes, we do." Weeks whisked by. Theo's script fattened, scenes cross-pollinating between explosions and confessions. He titled it The Last Queen. Each morning he emailed pages to Zoe. Each afternoon she sent back notes. Sometimes her changes were technical. This line repeats a beat from page 37, but other times she offered reminders of things invisible to cameras. Let her mourn what she leaves behind. Theo found himself revising not to please executives, but to witness Zoe's margin-scrawled gasp, "Yes!" She, in turn, visited farmers' markets, cornering chefs with samples of Naxian honey. One restaurant placed a standing order, another asked about a signature cocktail. She began sketching labels on hotel stationery, Papadaki Gold. The home exchange, scheduled for 1 month, stretched to 2, then 3. Their emails dipped into life's minutiae. He told her which village cat deserved adoption. She confessed she had started talking to Theo's hibiscus plant. They each dodged the obvious question, "What happens when we return?" The way a shy couple avoids dancing until the band's final song. Autumn swept in. Cycladic winds rattled the shutters the night Zoe wrote, "I miss the bees more than I thought possible, and maybe the beekeeper I never met." She pressed send before nerves claimed the confession. In Los Angeles, it was still midday. Theo paced the sand, phone in hand, composing and deleting replies. At last he wrote, "The beekeeper misses you too, though he only knows you in footnotes." The minute he sent it, he booked a flight home. An idea now indistinguishable from whitewashed walls and a crooked blue door. 3 flights and a ferry later, Theo staggered up the path to the cottage. The hives thrummed louder, as if debating his worthiness. He knocked on his own front door. Absurd, but where else could he go? Yorgos opened, eyes widening. "Theo, the Hollywood bee!" he bellowed, embracing him. Zoe, Yorga said, would arrive tomorrow for the annual Honey Harvest Festival. She was carrying orders for 60 jars and had promised to unveil new labels. Theo spent the night polishing the screenplay, printing a bound copy and tucking it inside a basket beside a ribboned jar labeled Blooms of October. The festival spilled through the village square in a whirl of market stalls, violins, and children daubed with face-painted antennae. Theo spotted Zoe before she saw him. Sun-browned shoulders, hair escaping a braid, hands flying in animated explanation as she persuaded a chef to drizzle honey over grilled halloumi. Approaching felt like walking onto a set during a live take. He cleared his throat. She turned. Recognition flickered, and the distance of 100 emails collapsed. Neither remembered exactly what was said first. Later, they would agree their greeting resembled a sigh more than a sentence. They wandered to the cliff path bordered by caper bushes. Words tumbled. Her bewilderment at electric gates, his near panic when a swarm swirled around him like a script meeting gone feral. He offered the basket. She lifted the screenplay as if it were a fragile frame of comb. "For me?" He nodded. "For us. The producer owes me notes, but I won't change a line without yours." She flipped pages, found her own sentences folded in, whole passages Theo had dedicated, "Dialogue by ZP, scene inspired by one who knows honey." Tears stung her eyes. She tugged him down to sit on a sun-warm boulder. "You gave them a better story." He shook his head. "You showed me where it lived." Silence settled, stitched by cicadas. Then he leaned in, tasting the faint brine on her lips, and wondered why every romantic climax he'd ever written felt gaudy compared to this wingbeat of a moment. The months that followed were built like hives, cell by careful. Theo rented a smaller apartment in Los Angeles, close enough for meetings but far from the carnival Klieg lights. He flew back to Naxos between rewrites, learning to smoke bees with steady hands while Zoe drafted marketing plans. The Last Queen sold to a studio not for its chase sequences, but for the quiet scene in which a beekeeper teaches the hero to stand still among swarming danger. When executives suggested cutting the bees, Theo threatened to walk. They stayed. During negotiations, he insisted on shooting in Greece, sliding a photo of Zoe's hillside across the table. Location scouts fell silent, picturing box office sunrises. Filming began the next spring. Some days, Theo revised lines on set, while Zoe wrangled actual bees into calm clusters for the camera. The lead actress, terrified of stings, practiced breathing techniques Zoe demonstrated. Papadaki Gold, now sporting labels etched with both their initials, supplied the craft services table. Tourists arrived asking to taste the movie honey, and local cafes started offering Queen's Latte. Zoe's grandfather's sign remained nailed to the gate, but she added a new plank beneath. And stories, too. One wrap party evening, under a trellis of blooming jasmine, Theo proposed the way he'd learned to move among hives, slowly, without sudden flair. He presented not a diamond, but a simple circlet of brushed gold, warm as beeswax. "Will you keep building cells with me?" Zoe answered by pressing her thumb against his palm, the beekeeper's silent yes he'd once seen her use with a frightened apprentice. As laughter, applause, and a few stray bees drifted around them, Theo realized he had finally written himself into a story that refused to end at fade out. Years later, moviegoers would remember The Last Queen for its sweeping aerial shots and the heroine's final line, "We guard what we love, and we love what we guard." But on Naxos, locals valued a smaller epilogue. At dusk, you could see two figures, one in a sun-bleached hat, the other scribbling in a dog-eared notebook, tending hives that gleamed like rows of tiny cinemas projecting light. If you lingered, you might hear him reading new dialogue aloud while she judged its sweetness, each word offered to the air the way a beekeeper opens a hive, gently, with faith that what returns will be honey.